Hello and welcome to Module 12, the final module in writing Task 1. And today we're going to focus on maps questions. So let's look in more detail at what we're going to do in this module. First, we're going to look at some examples from past IELTS exam papers when they asked you to describe maps. We're going to look at the overall structure that you should use for maps. We're going to look how to quickly understand maps, some things that you need to think about when you're looking at maps. We need to look at the language. There's some very specific language, like specific verbs and adverbs that we need to learn in order to describe maps accurately. We also need to describe where on the map we're describing. So we need to look at directions a little bit, so the language of directions. And finally, we're going to go through a sample answer. I'm going to take a real IELTS question that was about maps, and I'm going to go through the introduction, the overview, and the details paragraphs. So let's get going. Before we do, previous module was on process questions. These are quite rare questions. Maps questions are also quite rare, but they do come up sometimes, so it's essential that you know how to answer them. So if you didn't look at process questions, go back and check that out. So there are three main question types that you might be asked if you get a map. So you might be just shown a map in the present day, so just one map in 2016. You might be shown a map in the future, so you might be shown what, for example, New York or London will look like, what they think it will look like in 2020 or 2030. Or you might be shown two maps, one in the past and one in the present. Now, number 3 is the most common one. They will show you a map from 20 years ago, 50 years ago, and then they will show you what the same place looks like in the present. So for example, a map of Manchester in 1980 and a map of Manchester in 2016. And what they want you to do is just compare those two maps to show how Manchester has changed. So here is an example. I'm sorry that the quality of this is not very good. It's from a very old book, and there's not many question sample answers, so sorry about the quality of this. So this is showing you a map in 1990. So this is a map from 1990 in the past, and this map is also in the past, but it is the more recent past, so it is 2005, and it's of the same place. The maps will normally be of the same place. So this is a town of Templeton. You don't need to worry about where that town is or know anything about that town. What they want you to do is they want you to compare the town in 1990 with the town in 2005. Just how it has changed. That's all they want you to do. Just to highlight the key features, the main features, and compare how they have changed. If we look at another example, so in this one, this is another town, and it is 1995 and they've just put present, so whatever day it is today. So this is a small town in the past in 1995, and then this is a small town in the present, 2016 or 17, whenever you're looking at this. And again, what they want you to do is they just want you to explain how this town has changed. So for example, farmland and forests have changed to a golf course and tennis courts. Okay, very, very simple. So the overall structure that we should use for comparing two maps, we're only going to focus on comparing two maps because 95% of the questions are like this. Very, very rarely will you ever just get one map because there's not much to talk about if you get that. So the paragraph 1 is of course going to be a paraphrase of the question. It's going to be our introduction. Paragraph 2 is you're going to describe the general changes. So you're going to pick 2, 3, or maybe 4 general things, and you're going to write about them in your overview. And we're going to discuss what kind of things you would include in your overview later on in this module. Paragraph 3, you're going to describe specific changes in one part of the map. So specific changes in just one part of the map. Paragraph 4, you're going to describe specific changes in the other part of the map. So you're going to divide the map into two. You're going to describe one part in detail and then describe the other part in detail. Very straightforward structure, and this structure never changes. It's always the same for these types of questions. And we're going to be looking at a real sample answer later on, and I'm going to show you how each of these paragraphs works in more detail. But first we need to understand maps. So we need to first look at the map before we do any writing. Just like the process questions, just like the graphs, just like the charts, we first need to think. Remember, the task 1 is a thinking exercise and a writing exercise. So the first thing you'll notice is this north, south, east, west. That's very useful for us because it helps us describe where things are. And then we just need to look at the differences. What are the main differences? So we can see that farmland at Forest Park have changed to a golf course and a tennis course. We can look at this housing here, and in the north here it hasn't changed, but in the south here it has changed a little bit. There are 2 new houses and the road has been extended a little bit. Now, are there any other changes? The hotel, there's still a hotel, but they've added a car park. The cafe is still there, and the shops have changed to restaurants. So it's still the same buildings, but they've changed them from shops to restaurants. And the fish market has changed to apartments. The sea is obviously not changed at all, and the fishing port has been removed. There is no more fishing port. So those are the main changes, and you'd have to describe them generally and then describe them in more detail. So let's look at this map. Here's another example, and we would do the same thing. A useful tip is to divide the map into sections. So if I divide this map between here, so there's one river in the middle, so it makes sense to divide it here, and there's one main road in the middle, so I've divided it into 4. So just to make it easier for you, divide it into grids like this, and then you can do the same here, and it's easier just to compare the different grids. So if we compare this grid first with this grid, so as you can see, it has become far more residential. They've built more buildings. So they've removed some of the trees and they've replaced them with buildings. If we look at here, so we can see they've added an airport. We can see that they've removed this tree and replaced it with houses. And we can see that they have removed these houses. There's no house here anymore. We can also see that they have removed the trees and the houses from this area, and they have replaced them with a factory. They have also added a ferry port here. And we need to look at this. So they have built a supermarket here, and they have extended the railway line. They built a railway line that goes all the way from east to west, and they have built apartments here. So they've replaced the houses here with apartments. So dividing it into sections like that is an easy way to spot the main differences. So I wouldn't even do any writing for the first couple of minutes. I would just look at it and think about the changes, and then if you want to, you could just make notes on the map, or you can just make notes on a separate piece of paper, whatever you find easiest to do, whatever you're most comfortable doing. So changes. Let's think about the specific and general changes that we have to talk about. Remember, we're going to talk about general changes in the overview, and then we're going to talk about specific changes in the details paragraphs. So First one, rural to urban. These are all different changes that you should look out for. So rural is associated with the countryside, so not many buildings, lots of trees, lots of open space. To urban. Urban is more like a built up town or a city with lots of buildings. So often the map will go from rural to urban. Think about your own hometown. Normally this is what happens. It goes from rural to urban. Not always, but most of the time it does. Rural to industrial. So it could change from being the countryside to being industrial. So industrial means factories, lots of factories making things. Urban means more apartments, houses, shops, that sort of things that you would find in the middle of a city. Industrial, things that you would find outside of the city, well, most cities. Industrial to commercial. So industrial means factories, things that make things. Commercial means offices and shops. So office buildings where people work, and shops were shopping centers, shopping malls, things like that. Often they will knock down all of the factories and replace them with shops and offices and things like that. Commercial or industrial to residential. So residential is specifically where people live, so houses and apartments. So sometimes they change shops to apartments, sometimes they change factories to apartments, and this is how the town or the city changes. Large additions, so things like golf courses, big factories, or shopping malls. This is another big change in a town. Sometimes they add huge new things. So, will you find all of these things in a map in IELTS Writing Task 1? No, you probably will only find 2 or 3 or maybe 4 of them, but you won't find all of them. The reason why I'm telling you this is just these are the things that you should look for, and these are the general things that you will be talking about. These are the type of things that you will include in your overview. So let's look at how we might describe general changes, the things that we might include in our overview. In the overview, you will first have to describe changes generally. Think about it this way. You're only allowed to mention 3 changes. What would you say? So lots of my students, when I ask them to write an overview for maps, they don't know which things to pick. So I say to them, try and only pick 3 things. Imagine that I say to you, you are only allowed to pick 3 things. Which 3 things would you pick? And that helps people normally pick out the 3 key features. Might only be 2, might only be 4, but let's stick with 3 for the moment. Think about your hometown. Think of 3 big changes that have happened in your hometown. Imagine you're talking to a friend who has never been to your hometown, and they say to you, how has your hometown changed in the last 20 years or the last 10 years? And you would just describe generally what happened in your hometown. You wouldn't go into too much detail. So that's another way that can help you describe your overview. Okay, so now we're going to look at describing general changes. We're going to look at the types of sentences you would include in your overview. Not the exact same sentences, this is just to give you an idea of the types of sentences that you might include. So the first one, the town centre was developed dramatically. So developed is a verb, which means change, and dramatically is an adverb, which shows that it was changed a lot. The neighborhood was completely transformed. So completely is an adjective, transformed means changed completely. The residential area was totally reconstructed. So totally means absolutely 100%. And reconstructed means that it was once built and then it was knocked down or demolished and then it was built again. The old factories were totally redeveloped. So redeveloped means that they existed, they were knocked down or demolished, and they were made again. And totally means, again, 100%. So that's an adjective to modify that verb. The old houses were completely rebuilt. The city centre was totally modernized. So modernized means to make it more modern. So Obviously, there are lots more ways to describe general changes. This is just to give you an idea. And the specific grammar points that I'm using are, you will notice, verb plus adverb, or adjective plus verb. Verb plus adverb, or adjective plus verb. These are two ways that you can use to describe general change. Now, to describe specific changes, you will need to learn certain verbs that describe changes to a town or city. These should be used in the details paragraphs. So let's look at a few examples. The government demolished the industrial estate and developed a sports ground. So in red, these are the verbs that we use to describe change. Instead of just saying the government changed the industrial estate and changed the sports ground, we're going to look at these in much more detail and use a wider range of verbs. So that will help us describe the maps in more detail and get us higher marks for vocabulary. They removed the shops and replaced it with a skyscraper. A port was constructed at the edge of the river. The factory in the city centre was demolished and relocated to the north of the city. The old warehouses were replaced with new hotels. The factory was converted into apartments. If you were describing trees and forests, you could say the trees or the forest was cleared, the trees were cut down, the trees were chopped down, the trees were removed. Or if you were adding trees, you could say the trees were planted. A skate park was set up next to the swimming pool. So set up means developed or started. And a park was developed beside the forest. Now, these are just examples, but they are very good examples of the types of verbs that you should be using when you're describing specifically the changes from one date to another date. If you don't know the meaning of these, please feel free to pause and look them up in a dictionary right now, or just wait until the end of the video and then you can go back and look at them. And you should practice using these when describing maps, and I also have some exercises in the PDF to help you consolidate what you've learned. So the other thing that you need to be conscious of when describing maps is directions, because you need to say where on the map things are happening. So you must learn these. So north, south, west, east, northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. These are very, very easy to learn, and they might also be on the map, but these four are the crucial ones, because these will show the examiner that you have a wider range of vocabulary, and it will also make the essay flow much easier, make everything easier to understand, and get a higher mark overall. So let's look at this, for example. So we would say in the northeast, a golf course was developed and tennis courts were set up. We could say in the southwest, the fish market was replaced by apartments. And we could say in the west, 2 houses were added and the road was extended. We could say here, to the east of the hotel, to the east of the hotel. Or we could say to the right hand side of the hotel, a car park was constructed. So as you can see, north, south, east, west, left, right, these will help us describe specifically where things are on the map, and you should include that in your answers. These will be more in the specific details paragraphs rather than the overview. Okay, here is a question from a couple of years ago, and we're going to use this question to demonstrate how to answer one of these questions. So the introduction: both maps display an island before and after it was developed for tourism. So all I've done is just taken the question and I paraphrased it a little bit. Let's look at what I included in my overview. The island is long and thin, is surrounded by ocean, and has a beach to the west. Over the period, the island was completely transformed with the addition of a hotel and a pier. However, the eastern part of the island appears to have been left undeveloped. So the things that I have included here, I've described the island just a little bit, just to give a little bit of background to the reader. Remember, the reader might not have the map beside them, so you want to make it very clear what the map looks like. So the island is long and thin, surrounded by ocean, and has a beach to the west. Then I describe general changes. Completely transformed with the addition of a hotel and a pier. So it is completely transformed and then left undeveloped. So these are my two main elements. It's been completely transformed, and the eastern part is left undeveloped. These are my two main points that I'm including in my overview. You'll notice that I don't get into anything specific, just talking about things generally. In the details, the most noticeable additions are the hotel rooms. 6 buildings surrounding some trees have been built in the west of the island, and 9 buildings have been constructed in the center of the island. Between the two accommodation areas, a reception building and a restaurant has been developed. So you'll notice that I get into a lot of specific details. 6 buildings surrounding some trees, 9 buildings in the center, 2 accommodation areas, a reception building, a restaurant. So these are all very, very specific details. This is where we take the most significant things and describe them in more detail. And then finally, a pier has been built on the south coast of the island, allowing yachts access to the resort. Apart from the trees, the beach remains the only natural feature to remain relatively untouched. However, it does appear that it is now used for some swimming. So as you can see, I've just taken some of the more general factors, like here, it remains untouched, undeveloped, and I've described it in a little bit more detail. So let's review everything that we learned in this final module. We looked at some examples. The primary examples that we looked at is a map from the past and a map in the present, or a map in the recent past. Those are the number one types of essays for maps that you'll be looking at. Then we looked at the general structure. So introduction, new paragraph, overview, new paragraph, describe half of the map in one details paragraph, describe the other half of the map in another details paragraph. Then we looked at the type of things we need to look at, so things like rural to residential, or industrial to residential, or industrial to commercial, becoming more rural or becoming more urban. These are the general things that you should look out for. Then we looked at specific verbs and adverbs and adjectives that we use to describe both things generally and more specifically. Then we looked at north, south, east, west, to the northwest, to the northeast, to the southwest, those kind of things, so that we can describe things accurately. And then we looked at a sample answer. And if you followed everything in this course, I don't think that you will have any problem describing a map question. If you get a map question, you will be very lucky, because they're not very difficult at all. You really just describe what you see. It's that simple. Congratulations, you have finished IELTS Writing Task 1. That is everything you need to learn about IELTS Writing Task 1. That is the most comprehensive course in the world. There is no other course that gives you that amount of detail and covers every single thing. So you should be confident that you are able to answer any Task 1 question. However, there might have been some things that you didn't understand. Don't worry, just go back and look at the modules that you didn't understand. You might have to look at certain parts 2 times or 3 times. Go through all of the PDFs and do those exercises. They are designed to help you understand everything. And when you have done that, then you can start doing your essays. You can start practicing your essays. Remember to practice slow and fast. Practice slow when you're first learning, when you're thinking, and when you're doing new things, and then start trying to do them in 20 minutes. So well done. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in writing task 2. Goodbye.